Hey, there we are. Fantastic. Again, thank you so much for coming. This is really a great turnout, actually. I'm very gratified personally. And we want to thank our panel of experts here who will join us. Really quickly, I'd like to introduce David Galin, who is the president of the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore and a member of the board of directors, are you not, of the Poe House and Museum? You can use the mic, please. Okay, if you use
I'm at the house a lot, yeah.
That's great.
I'm not on the board.
And then Mark Redfield, who is, as you very recognizable. 17 years have passed or so, but very recognizable.
Yeah, I want to thank Zach and Harbor East, Alex, and all of you for supporting the Poe House and Museum and the National Edgar Allan Poe Theater. That's really, really wonderful. So thank you for coming out and supporting.
I'd like to give everyone I'd like to give the panel just a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about themselves, and then we'll talk a little about the actual death of Poe. So David, talk to us a little bit about yourself. I know that you have you've done a number of, quite a few years of research on the death of Poe, and is there a book that you have coming out soon? Is that correct, or what is it that you're...
Yes, I have what I feel is an objective examination of Poe's death. It's an in-depth, it's over 110,000 words. It's being published by Lehigh University Press in 2024. I also put out a book a couple of years ago for Arcadia about Poe's time in Baltimore and how the city appeared when he lived here. And I've been at the Poe House since Poe Baltimore was formed in 2013.
Excellent. Mark, talk to us a little bit about your checkered past. And Mark is, for those of you who don't know Mark as well as I do, he's also, this is Renaissance man. He's an artist, he's a filmmaker, he's a radio dramatist, which is particularly near and dear to my heart. And I don't know if any of you know about the National Edgar Allan Poe Theater's radio dramas, but you can find us on National Public Radio. But I didn't mean to upstage you just then. Talk a little bit about yourself, and if you have any comments about the movie.
I hardly remember. 17 years ago is this film was made because I was trying to do a feature, and it only cost 12 grand, and it looks every penny of it, doesn't it? I'll try to do this in 6 minutes or less.
That sounds good.
But the idea for me was I was looking for something to do that Roger Corman hadn't done. So there was a British feature film based on The Telltale Heart, and I developed a script that I like to this day, but we never produced it. It's set about a week after Lincoln is shot. And the last time I tried to set it up, I had some very, very dear friends, some actors that had made themselves famous in the horror genre. Robert Quarry was going to be the man with the eye. He's Count York, a vampire in the 1970s. Ingrid Pitt was to be his wife. She did a number of Hammer horror films in the 70s, and we were really great friends. A number of things happened, and that just set me into a rabbit hole of Poe, the man. I mean, like all of us who like Poe, I've been interested in the poems and the stories since forever. So that led to this deep dive into who he was, and just decided to do this project. I didn't go after any investors. We had a studio in Glen Burnie. My idea was that two things I wanted to accomplish as we shot it. It needed to be somehow perennially about the artist struggle. So whether it was a painter today, a musician today, a filmmaker today, an actor today, where is your audience? Where do you get the financing? How do you publish? How do you do what you do? I think it's the same today as it was in 1849 and beyond. A lot of authors and writers, they had money. They came from family money, other things. I think the other thing that was very interesting, because even though, and we'll get into this in a moment, I'm trying to come back around the block, but even though I lean in this very heavily into what is known as the cooping theory, there were pre-existing conditions for Poe, but I was very interested 17, 18 years ago, as much as I am now, about dreams and REM sleep. If he was dealing with forms of, and we get to this in a minute, forms of alcoholism, delirium tremens, REM sleep and sleep, what about that period? And you know, what if the whole thing was a dream? Even though I lean heavily into some ideas of what I think. And they haven't much changed. I have not seen this movie with an audience in a long time, so it was kind of great. No heads fell onto their chests. That was a good sign. And the film was made very, very quickly. It was shot in sound stages that we had in Glen Burnie in about 12 days, no waiting. I had a distribution deal already in place for it, so it did its world premiere in the Manchester Festival of Films in England, opened here at the Charles Theatre, and then was on DVD by December 2006. And so it's out. I think in a few years, if we've got some time, I would like to redo some things. I don't think it's finished. I want to do some things with Jennifer Rouse here, who did the initial soundtrack and music and is in the film.
Can you introduce Jennifer for us, please?
This is Jennifer Rouse right here. Jennifer, if you've listened to any of our audio drama, she is the composer and the sound designer, and she is just doing she's 50% of everything we do in our audio drama, and she's quite wonderful. And then just to wrap up my Poe journey, this film got me, I did deal with one or two scholars. I read everything I could get my hands on. But this led me to Jeff Savoy, who David works with at the Poe Society. It led me to Jeff Jerome and the Poe House. And it's a potted history, yes. You mentioned it. I'm just going to say that I was part of the transition from City of Baltimore and Jeff's curatorship to Poe Baltimore. I was the vice president until I had a heart attack and needed to relax a little bit. So I've been moving on to other things, and I can't escape Poe. We're in our audio, we're working on a biography of Poe that runs about 10 hours. It will star Jeffrey Combs and some other friends. I am still producing Jeffrey Combs' one-man show, Nevermore. I put that out on Audible in 2015, and so we're going to do it in New York next year. It's kind of a final hurrah. And so back to how this living writer, when he was alive and now is dead, where do you want to take this conversation?
Excellent.
I'm so
yes.
curious.
Yeah. Let's launch into that actually, because I did want to say I definitely got glimmers of Roger Corman. It was fascinating to watch some of the better known local talent that you have, including Tony Sandeas. If you know Tony Sandeas, he does a wonderful renditions of the works of Poe by memory. But let us, in fact, talk about the death of Edgar Allan Poe. There is, when people talk about the death of Edgar Allan Poe, they're talking about two different things, right? The circumstances of his death and the cause of his death. And even now, 174 years later, people are still arguing about it. There was a piece in the Washington Post, even just a couple of months ago, I think, about the condition that caused his death. I think they were attributing it in that case to tubercular meningitis, which I didn't even know was a thing. I thought those were two different things. But at any rate, before we get your opinions, I just want to talk to the audience here really quickly. How many of you think you know how Poe died? Is there anybody who has any speculations at all? How many people think it was through cooping, which is this?
Who was there?
Who was there?
Somebody was there.
Who was there? Right, exactly. Cooping, as this movie suggests, was an early form of voter fraud where people were either waylaid or shanghaied, either made drunk, or just beaten up, and then kept in very small holding pens like chickens in coops, and then taken from place to place to.
If I can interject, there's a brilliant. I saw your hand. There's a brilliant sequence in Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York, which I think is after this little tiny thing, and it is a brilliant dramatization of what cooping was. So next time you look at that film,
do you have a comment that you wanted to make?
I just said, I think that was probability.
Cooping? I think there's
to explain what cooping is. It's
We can't hear the question.
Well, it was the audience simply. The member of the audience simply said that he believed that cooping was a likely possibility regarding the circumstances of Poe's death. But David, talk a little bit about cooping.
What cooping is it's a form of political kidnapping. What these gangs did is they would round up derelicts off the street, guys that were already drunk, people that couldn't speak English, immigrants, that sort of thing, and they would corral them in basements and backyards a day or two before the election, and they would get them sloppy drunk to the point where they couldn't resist, and then they'd march them around to the polls and vote them over and over again. And they accomplished this by changing their clothes, changing their appearance. And supposedly this would fool the election judges, and they could use them over and over again. Poe was found on election day in clothes that were not his at an election poll, at a voting poll. And that's really how the cooping theory came about. But the theory itself was not put forth immediately. It didn't appear actually until 10 years after Poe's death. And there was an interval there where everyone thought that the cause of death was just alcohol related. He just went on a bender.
Yeah.
Was he a chronic alcoholic? Did they?
Oh, this is interesting, but real quick, before getting into that, there is this newspaper print that you had out in the lobby, or have out in the
I'm
lobby.
very proud of having tracked that down. It's hard to read, but we'll talk about it. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to throw that to you as the election was for a sheriff, and in Alex's collection. Take it away.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this just came to my attention through some research that I did. What wasn't specifically mentioned in the movie was that in his delirium, Poe said a variety of different things. One of which was he continued to shout out the name Reynolds. So if you haven't had a chance yet, check out the very faded front page of the October 3rd, 1849 edition of the Baltimore Sun, which was a listing of all of the various voting judges for this election for sheriff. The Fourth Ward voting judge, and this is where Poe was found, it was a gentleman by the name of Henry Reynolds. And one of the things that Poe was claimed that Poe said in his delirium was to continually shout out the name Reynolds. Now, my view of it, and I don't want to speak for the rest of us here, but my view of it is if you're going to commit voter fraud, who better to have on your side than a voting judge? Right. It's also interesting that at the time, the registration for voting, there was no real registration for voting. As I believe, David, you might know about this better. I heard that there was like just colored cards or something that were assigned to people to indicate the order in which they would come in.
Well, the ballots that were in the paper were not colored, but the ones that were handed out at the polls were colored. Right. These ward healers, these thugs, could actually determine who you were voting for by the time you got to the window. But there was no voter registration. The judge, the election judge, that was his responsibility to qualify the voters.
Right.
So if these gangs found compliant judges or judges that would look the other way, they were in business.
It's fascinating. I would commend you to check it out. And also, if you can lay your hands on the October 7th, 1949 edition of the Baltimore Sun, one of the reporters there, a gentleman by the name of James Brady, did a lot of detective work, which is what led me to that. But to get back to the question that you asked, let's talk about Poe and alcoholism. Do you want to give us your 2 cents about that?
Yeah, I think, and democracy is hard, isn't it? And I intentionally had nobody say the name Reynolds. And the other famous thing he is famous for saying, and Lord help my poor soul, and then, right. And I decided to give that to Dr. Moran. It just seemed the second half of the film is problematic. Anyway, I think that Poe was one of these alcoholics that had trouble handling his alcohol. I think that one glass and he was flying. And I think this did get him into a great deal of trouble because he was, it's funny. I often say that, I really do feel that Poe is as normal as anyone in this room. And he very, very much had passions. He was very high strung. at times in his life. His childhood was a wonderful childhood, well fed, well cared for, lots of money, raised and schooled in England, but a very emotional person, and a person who wanted to make a living as a writer, which was not easy. And drink was everywhere. I mean, we take for granted drinking water, don't we? Until there's a problem with the reservoir, and we have to worry about our drinking water. And so gin and other kinds of alcoholic, beverages. Bottled water is good, but so I think that he wrestled with that throughout his life. And I want to pass this to David, but then there are some other things that I lean toward that Poe may have been dealing with as he approached 40. But yeah,
David, do you have anything to add to that?
The tradition is that he had a sensitivity to alcohol and couldn't drink more than 1 glass or 2 glasses, and he would be 3 sheets. But the leading theory, there was a preponderance of evidence that he actually died from delirium tremens. And if that's the case, then he didn't really have a problem with drinking alcohol.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem with, I unfortunately have direct experience with the effects of delirium tremens. A good friend of mine actually was in a coma because he tried to go cold turkey immediately before his wedding. He had problems with alcohol the entire time, and I'm not exactly sure of the circumstances, I'll have to ask him, but he did have a drink or two at a celebration, and that kicked in this whole delirium tremens phenomenon, and again, he ended up having to be placed into a medically induced coma because he would have died otherwise. So that's a significant ailment that can come, especially when you're trying to straighten out.
Well, delirium tremens is really another word for alcohol withdrawal.
Right.
The delirium and the tremens tremors are symptoms of the alcohol withdrawal. And alcohol withdrawal, unlike opium withdrawal, alcohol withdrawal can kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Yes, and that's what I'm leading to, alcoholic psychosis, possibly that he may be experiencing. Because a lot of what I've seen and that you showed us looks like alcoholic psychosis, which can turn into paranoia, paranoid schizophrenia, that kind of thing. So did you entertain that?
Let me make sure everyone heard. Did everyone hear what this audience member just said? It was a suggestion that perhaps it was alcoholic psychosis that might have been ultimately the cause or the phenomenological causes of his death. So go ahead, please.
And there is. So as a dramatist, behind trying to get to the age of 40, when he is in his life, by all records and his own letters, in a very good place, and he's moving to a good place. There is still a lot of emotional baggage for a very emotional man. This is a person who took everything, I think, very hard with the death of his mother, with the rejection of his foster parents. They did not truly adopt him. The Allan in his middle part of his 3-word name is his foster parents. So the battles he had with his foster father, the very fact that he lost his wife, Virginia, who, I touch on some things visually here that I believe. I don't think that Poe was asexual. I don't think he was non-sexual. I think he had passions and he had feelings. I think it's a mistake to look at a person's work necessarily and the preponderance of poetry, whether it's Ullalum or the lost loves and that kind of thing. But Virginia broke his heart. I think he loved Virginia on all of the colors of the rainbow of love. This young woman meant a great deal to him.
It's interesting that you brought up Ullalum in relation to his sexuality. I assume you're referring to his psyche.
Yeah. And so my point is that, here is a person who highly emotional, obviously could be fiercely angry. We know he made enemies in Boston and New York, in literary circles, because his nickname as a literary critic, as we know, was the Tomahawk Man. He had very strong opinions. He could go into flights of anger, but I think he was also a very caring man. So all of this, to come back to your question in some ways, is a personality that the only thing that when I thought of this thing 16, 17 years ago rather, is that there was some other pre-existing thing that was completely out of his control, even if there was any sort of what we now know of certain contemporary psychiatry and therapy and help, someone for him to talk to, for God's sake. I think that he possibly was dealing with a brain tumor. I think that there was something that if there was, and the mysteries which we cannot connect the dots, he's found in someone else's clothes, he's missing for several days, which as David has pointed out, I'm really looking forward to your book next year, just the fact that these little interludes of going missing has happened to him before. But the very fact that something very traumatic, if all of this emotional trauma was part of his life, along with the joy of living. He was a humorist. He could write comedy. It doesn't translate to us in this century almost at all. But he was good for a joke, and he had a mean sarcastic streak toward the humor side.
But you left out heart disease. I didn't see that in there. In the film.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I've counted 41 theories that have been formally proposed at one time or another on his death. 41 theories.
And there are some, and I'm sure
most of them are in your film.
and you just try to throw a big enough net, and you make up your own mind. Even though we push toward cooping, even the delirium tremens, and back to my thoughts about what sleep, REM sleep is. The tremors are all, that was all the thinking that I thought back then. But then there are, of these, the multitude of theories, there are some that have just been completely knocked out, which are pretty good.
Like rabies.
Rabies.
Yeah.
Rabies.
Carbon monoxide.
Carbon monoxide, yeah. Actually, David, do you have any pet theories yourself that you'd like to focus on?
When I wrote the book, I resolved to just let the facts take me where they will, and the research take me where they will. And I really had no pet theory when I started writing. I hoped that I could support the cooping theory, because that was the one I thought was just too much of a coincidence, all the circumstances.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I found nothing really solid to support that. There is a preponderance of evidence that supports delirium tremens, and Moran himself actually pretty much says that in a letter to his aunt, Mariah Clem, 6 weeks after Poe died. She wrote to him asking about the circumstances, and he wrote back to her, and he appears to be transcribing from a report in which he's describing graphically delirium tremens.
It's fascinating because he was wrestling throughout his life with alcohol, and in fact, before he began to romance again Elmira Royster Shelton in Richmond, he'd had a very tumultuous relationship with Sarah Helen Whitman, who made it a condition of her engagement that he try to straighten out.
That's a 2-hour movie right now.
Yeah, no kidding. It's fascinating. I mean, what a rabbit hole. Just the more you read about it, it's like, when did this guy actually have time to write? But he was definitely trying to support himself and his little tiny family as best he could after he was cut off from his wealthy foster folks. Go ahead. It looks like you were going to say something.
Oh, I don't really know where I was going to go with this, except you triggered a thought that when I did research this, I read everything I could get my hands on, but there was very little. The explosion of work on the life of Poe, the theories. I mean, after this came out, other books, the Silverman, but there were the two classics that had been written in the early 20th century, but there weren't all of the letters either. I had a certain collection of Poe letters, and then since that time, the Poe Society of Baltimore is 2-volume set. There have been more letters that Poe had written or correspondence. So there's more stuff, and you've uncovered some marvelous things.
I had tremendous advantage with the internet, and be able to go where a lot of researchers couldn't go before. So I mean, that was my advantage.
And that includes, I just want to mention that there are photographs. We do want to know if Nelson Poe looked like Tony Sandeas or not. That would be pretty good.
Right.
But and you pointed something out, and truly, Dr. Moran, in the 1840s, there was a heavy Irish presence in Baltimore.
And German.
And
German.
German. My family. My mother is here tonight. One of the other stars. She was the landlady in the film.
Yay!
So here we are, 17 years older. How did that happen? But it was a choice to give Dr. Moran an Irish accent. We had a conversation earlier. So you make choices for color. Particularly, this is the weirdest thing I've ever done. It's a poor man's David Lynch film, and other movies we've made, have bigger budgets and But I hope you guys enjoyed it, for as grim and as dark as it was.
Yeah, I think you're selling yourself short a little bit, Mark. I mean, it's quite an enjoyable movie.
But one makes certain choices as a dramatist or whatever. The Irish accent, I wanted that color. Obviously, the investors, they are completely fabricated. That's not based on any letters, just on the very fact that he had trouble, as so many do, to find money. And
He actually had a deal with Edwin Patterson from the St. Louis area. He was going to bankroll his magazine. This is at the time of his death. So he really wouldn't have needed the investors because he already had that set up already.
Yeah, and that investor search thing is prior to this, but it is that one thing that I latched onto because dramatically, Poe was in a really good place in 1849. I mean, in life, he was in a good place. There is another actor there's two actors I want to mention before we move on. One is if you're a fan of Baltimore filmmakers, and you know John Waters' work, and you know early Waters, if you know John's early films, my good friend George Stover plays the twins, and I've known George forever. And I love George. And George, if you're watching and listening to this, I think it's one of your best performances. It was really great. And I need to say this because this means a lot to me. There's one of the other investors, played by J.R. Liston. J.R. passed away in August. He was 90, and he was probably the single actor I have worked with most in my life. When I played Romeo when I was 18, he was my Friar Lawrence. And we'd known each other that long, and he's been in several of my films. We did an audio drama. He's my Watson to my Sherlock Holmes. We've done a number of plays together after we did Romeo and Juliet. We did Sleuth, so much work together. And in the last year, he Alzheimer's, and he didn't remember his work, didn't remember my work, our work together, or me. And we have one more piece coming out on Audible. We have an adaptation of, and I just need to say this.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have an adaptation of Eugene O'Neill's Anna Christie, and he plays Chris, Anna's father. And so that'll be Jay's last performance. So it's good to see him.
Yeah, I'm sure he would be very grateful for that fitting tribute. I want to keep an eye on the time. We're almost at time. So are there any questions or observations from the audience? Yeah, please.
Yeah, one thing I thought was really cool that the movie does is it takes a bunch of theories and kind of plays them as if they're all accurate, and that kind of made me think of things differently. Because we have all of these reports of people saying that Poe was acting erratically and seemed a little bit sick way before his death. So I mean, who's to say that it's one thing? It could be a lot of things, and I think that we want to put this sort of investigative lens. We want a clear-cut answer of what happened, but this isn't Auguste Dupin's work. This is real life, and so I think that it's interesting to think, 10 of these theories could be true.
No, well, there's a very real possibility that he died from a comorbidity of more than one condition. There's no question about that.
Anyone else? Yes, please.
Just wanted to make a comment regardless of budget. It was extremely impressive, and I think Mr. Redfield hit on two important things that I was impressed by, which I'm not impressed by things really easily. But one, adding that struggling artist, you know, him trying to sell the stylist, that's a part of Poe's life, about his dream for winning the magazine and all of that, I've never seen that anywhere else. And again, this film, Corman, other films, I've never seen a film like this. I saw this years ago, but seeing it again with fresh eyes, I was impressed. And also that showing the sort of dream state and the flashes that Poe in this film had, that made me contemplate the real Poe and what his emotions and things might have been during his life, that I think gets downplayed a lot because we're talking about his works and other things. So.
Thank you. Is there anyone else with any comments?
I just have a
One
comment.
last.
Have either of you seen the annotation of his poem? There's a huge text, a voluminous textbook.
Are you talking about Mabbitt's?
Annotation?
Yeah, it's a 3-volume set.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned that the story that he wrote about the teeth is pronounced Berenice instead of
It's
Ber-
4 syllables, no matter
right,
what you do
3
with it.
syllables.
It-
Well,
it's
because he
4
actually
syllables.
he specifically said it rhymes with very spicy, which is
Berenice.
interesting. That story is one of several that he wrote here in Baltimore. There was some dispute, and we'll just wrap this up super quickly. But there was some dispute. People have tried to dispute the cooping theory because Poe was famous at that time, but. I mean, famous
Well, his
and
photograph
famous
was in every newspaper.
Right,
He was on
right.
stamps. No.
Right, exactly. That's precisely it. Yeah, if you're getting a copy of the newspaper, you'd be lucky to have a line drawing there. And in reality, Poe, and not taking anything away from the Poe's legacy in Baltimore, but he was here for 3 years. We have his body, so we win. But at the same time, he also wrote some significant work while he was here. Morella, Berenice, Shadow, a Parable, which is really underrated. A few others.
If you're drunk, you can put clothes on anybody,
Well, exactly, but I think that the people who are trying to dispute the cooping theory are looking at fame through the lens of the 20th and 21st century.
And I guarantee you people didn't know what he looked like,
Right, exactly.
except his enemies and
Poe had the reputation of being effusive when he got drunk. He would have called attention to himself. He would have told everybody who he was and how famous he was after he got drunk. I mean, for them to march him around town like that, it's difficult to believe that he wouldn't have got caught.
If he was
That's-
passed out, he wouldn't have been.
that's very
Drunk
possible.
and passed out,
Well, they're not going to vote you if you're passed out. You have.
You have to at least drop it into the ballot
Right.
box. But there's another, in the push me pull you of is cooping it or part of it, the trademarks of Poe. The mustache is relatively late in his life. The mustache, he did not sport one for most of his life. And, have you ever tried to walk around with a parrot on your shoulder? I mean, come on. It is not an easy thing to do. So it is likely that he was not recognized. I know that there's a question.
This will be the last question. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I just had heard that he was a fan of absinthe, and back in the day, it had hallucinogenic, so in other words, that's not.
David has a strong opinion about this. I think.
This is when the whole from the neck up eye rolls, basically, is what you just saw.
David, what do you have to say about that?
Well, the absinthe fad didn't really start in this country until after Poe died. He had friends that certainly
Acquired it, yes.
acquired. Henry Hurst in Philly, he actually died from the effects of absinthe. I'm trying to think. John Sarton was another Philadelphia acquaintance. He was known to drink absinthe. And there's another one there. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. But most of those had difficulty with the drink much later than Poe's death.
We could do this for a long, long time, and in fact, you're welcome to join us outside after this is over. But I do want to thank our panelists, David Galin and Mark Redfield. Thank you very much for your work here. Quick question to folks here, and I know some of you are from out of town, but if we decided to do this on an ongoing basis, sort of Poe on film, and have a regular screening of Poe-related movies.
I'm in.
I'm in. All right, great. Any show of hands? Yay! All right. All the board members should take note of that, I think. All right. Well, thank you so much for making this a success. Really appreciate it. If you'd like to join us for conversation outside, please do. Once again, thank you to the Harbor East Cinemas for all of your great work, and very specifically to Zach Wenger, without whom this would actually probably not even happen. So
Yes,
thank you all.
Thank you, and thank you all.